Everyone, welcome back to AP Environmental Science. In today's video, we're going to start our new unit on biodiversity and go over two topics, which is the introduction to biodiversity as well as ecosystem services. All right, so for each title slide I have here, I did link a few more resources and videos for you just in case you need to watch additional things or go over anything else in the video that you want a further explanation on. But of course, everything in this video and these notes and anything from your labs and activities is fair game for stuff on the test. Nothing from these videos, unless it is the Mr. Schmeed's review video, would potentially be on a test, but they're just additional resources for you in case you need them. Okay, so we just have to go over a few important terms before we move into the nitty-gritty of this unit. So biological diversity and diversity in general just means the variety of different things present in an area, whereas biological diversity is the variety of life present in a particular area. So the different kinds of species present, the different number of species present in an area. And as a reminder, a species is all individuals that are capable of interbreeding and producing a viable offspring. So dogs and cats are different species because they cannot breed and make a baby. Horses and donkeys are different species because even though they can make a baby, they can make a mule or a hinny. That mule or the hinny is infertile or sterile. They cannot produce their own offspring. So species are defined as all individuals that are capable of producing viable offspring. A population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same area that are capable of interbreeding and sharing genetic information. So, for example, a dog and cat species would be different, even though they are living in the same area. There's still two totally different populations of two different species. A utilitarian species is a group of species that provide some kind of product that is of a direct value to people. Bees are a great example of this because they provide honey. It's a direct product that we can buy and sell. And the public service species means that the nature and its diversity provides some kind of service. So, for example, like national parks or state parks, the species that live within them and the geography of them make them a public service species because they provide some kind of service or attraction to the public. Okay, so now let's talk about the different types of biodiversity and how they are measured in ecosystems and how they are important. So, biodiversity is broken down into several different types, and they can be measured in several different ways depending on what you're looking at. So, genetic diversity is the first kind of thing that we can break down biological diversity into. And genetic diversity is the total number of different genetic characters present within a specific species. So this is going to be the different types of genotypes that are present in a population versus another population, as well as the resulting phenotypes. So this is going to be the molecular scale, so the different base pair sequences. This is throwing back a little bit into biology. If you guys remember, DNA is present in all living things. All living things have DNA. The DNA base pairs are made up of these four different nucleotides: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. And it's the arrangement of these letters that make all individuals unique. Now, certain arrangements of these letters result in different genes, and not like, blue genes, but like GENES, DNA genes. And these genes code for a particular trait, like brown hair or blonde hair. So the physical trait that you see is the phenotype, and that can result from a different genotype. So genetic diversity is going to be the total number of different genotypes present within a population, because it is different. Not all humans look exactly the same and have the same characteristics. So the different types of genes you have within a population is going to be the genetic diversity. Habitat diversity is the different kinds of habitats in a given area. So is it all the same type of geography? Do you have the same type of trees, the same type of landscape, the same type of aquatic ecosystems, like wetlands versus swamps? Like, what do you have in a particular area? Because the different kinds of habitats you have will result in different kinds of species living in those areas. And then species diversity, which in turn has three different qualities. The species richness, which is the total number of different species present, not the total number of individuals, but the total number of different species. So, like having 5 different species of tree versus only having 2 different species of tree. It's the total number of different species. And species richness tends to be a lot higher towards the equator, which, as you guys might know, tends to be areas that are very biodiverse if you are in a tropical rainforest or any sort of tropical biome, whereas desert biomes, which can be near the equator, tend to be less biodiverse. And then as we move towards the poles, the North and South poles, they do get a lot colder. Again, as a reminder, weather is influenced by solar insolation coming in from the sun due to the tilt of the earth, throwing back in stuff from our unit 2. So as areas are colder, like the tundra and Arctic biomes, we have less biodiversity and a lower species richness. They're harsher climates to live in. Species have to be very well adapted to live in those climates. Species evenness is the relative abundance of species. So how many individuals do you have in a species in comparison to another species? So like having more species of bird in comparison to more species of owls, or having more individuals present in a species versus another, like having more birds of one type of species versus, less owls of another type of species. And species dominant is the most abundant species, so the most numerous, the highest quantity. Okay, so these are some practice problems that you may or may not see on a test for this unit on the AP exam. As a reminder, we are not going to do a test on this unit. We're just going to have everything be due after winter break. And instead, I'll just count your project as, a major assessment grade. So go ahead and read over this question and answer it in the Edpuzzle now. Okay, so this question was trying to get you to apply these terminology terms of the different types of measuring species biodiversity in, an actual applied context. So we're looking at community 1 versus community 2, and they're made up of 4 different species A, B, C, and D. And we can see that community 1 and community 2 have the same species richness. They both have 4 different species, but different species evenness. Community 1 would be considered more even, whereas community number 2, species A, would be the dominant species. Oh, and that's this one. Oops. Okay, so each type of diversity has examples of the different consequences. So depending on what type of diversity you have, there could be benefits and, downfalls as well. So there's also high consequences and low consequences, meaning that this is kind of like the cost-benefit ratio of why different diversities are good versus bad. Any type of diversity is considered good as long as you have a relatively high diverse community. But depending on what specific type of diversity makes your community diverse is going to have more severe consequences than the other. So if we look at each type of biodiversity, let's start with genetic. There is a high consequence of you being really disease resistant, but a low consequence would be disease susceptibility. And as we read over these, different types of diversity are going to have different types of consequences. So the species biodiversity is going to have ecosystems responding really well to disturbances, which we're going to go over in a topic later in this unit. Habitat, you're going to have higher number of species because you have more diverse habitats, more able to fit different species that are adapted to live in those habitats. And overall ecosystem diversity will have a greater diversity of ecosystems that can lead to more species coming there. Now, we'll talk more about bottleneck effect later in this unit, but bottleneck events are random chance events such as hurricanes, forest fires, any sort of natural disturbance that can disrupt or change or disturb a population. And typically, these bottleneck events result in a great loss of genetic diversity. And the reason why they're called bottleneck effect is because of the overall shape of an actual bottle and the neck. We can see here in this bottle, this is the original population, and each colored bead represents a different variation within a species. And we can see there's 3 variations, and the more predominant variations tend to be the blue and the white, whereas the yellow tends to be a little bit more rare. So when you do have some kind of disturbance that disrupts a population and significantly decreases the size of it, and it's not really selecting for adaptations or just random chance events, you're going to have the more common variation surviving at the end. So we have a higher rate of blue species or blue traits being present in their surviving population solely because there's more instances of that trait in the original population. So populations that are larger and more genetically diverse will be more likely to recover from these disruptions because there isn't a dominant species and they're typically more even. So we talked a little bit about generalist and specialist species in in Unit 3, but this is just more of a review. So generalist species have a very, this is not right. I need to fix this. There we go. Broad range of tolerance. There we go. Let me fix that. Okay, so generalist species have a very broad range of tolerance. And again, tolerance is any sort of abiotic and biotic condition that an organism can withstand before experiencing stress. So abiotic and biotic factors would be anything from like temperature, pH, the amount of predators, the type of predators that are there, what sort of food supply do you have. It's anything that an organism can kind of be within and still survive and reproduce. So generalists have a very broad range of tolerance. They can withstand really high and low temperatures. They have a broad diet, whereas specialist species have a very narrow range of tolerance. They typically eat very little different types of food and can only stay within a biome that doesn't have a broad change in temperatures. So as a reminder, loss of habitat is the number one driver or cause of species extinction. This is because all organisms are adapted to their environment. They have specific characteristics and traits that allow them to survive and reproduce within their respective habitat. And when you take that habitat away and they lose their source of food, they lose their home, how are they going to survive and reproduce? So while generalist species are more resilient to changes in their environment and in their ecosystem, habitat loss is still the number one reason why species go extinct. Deforestation, global climate change, ocean warming, etc., they're all resulting in massive changes in habitats, the abiotic and biotic factors, thus driving species to extinction. So why do people value biodiversity? Why is it important? Well, there's a few different reasons. There's moral reasons, which is just the belief that species have the right to exist independent of their value to people. Going back to the utilitarian species, those are species that provide a direct product that's of value to people. And my example was bees, but there's so many more than that, like any sort of cattle that provide meat and milk and dairy products to people. They are important economically, but there's also, theological reasons, which is how some religions value nature and its diversity because it's God's creation. Ecological reasons, which is species have roles in their ecosystem that are important in maintaining that ecosystem to keep them balanced, which are keystone species we'll talk about later in this unit, as well as aesthetic reasons. Certain species are just cute, and we love them because they're cute. But the main reason why we should be caring about biodiversity, regardless of all those other reasons, is mainly because of the ecological importance of biodiversity and maintaining it so we can have stable communities. So this is all data showing how, when you have different numbers of plant species, you have more stability within your ecosystems. So this graph on the left-hand side, the x-axis is the number of different fungal species in the soil, and the y-axis is measuring different things, such as the total shoot biomass, the total root biomass. So the roots is what's underground, the shoots is the plant above, as well as the total plant phosphorus. And again, phosphorus is a limiting nutrient. You need, all life needs it in order to create and build our DNA. So as we have more different fungal species, decomposers present in an ecosystem, the shoot biomass increases, the root biomass increases, as well as the phosphorus. So the more different types of fungal species you have, not just a lot of fungal individuals, but the different types of species you have, the more likely that the biomass of the shoot and the root of the plant are going to increase, and the total phosphorus is going to increase as well. This is also showing you the stability of herbivores as well as the stability of the predator parasite species richness in an ecosystem when you have higher plant species. So the stability of herbivores increases as you have more plant species. Remember, herbivores only eat plants, so you're going to have a more stable herbivore population, your primary consumers, if you have a wide variety of plant species to eat. There's going to be less instances of competition, less instances of, the competitive, of more instances of niche partitioning. So organisms did not carry out the competitive exclusion principle because you have a wide variety of plants available in that ecosystem for your herbivores to eat. Less instances of competition if there's a variety of what you can eat in your ecosystem. And the same thing for your predator-prey. As you have more plant species, there's a more stable interaction between your predators and parasites, which do act as population controllers. So now let's move on to 4.2. This is a relatively short topic on ecosystem services. And same thing, I have some review videos here for you as well. So we just talked about biodiversity and its importance. Now let's talk about the overall ways that ecosystems can provide services to humans and why they are valuable to us. So humans rely only on a few species for essential needs, such as pollination, that would be bees, drinking water, flood prevention, and intrinsic value, and of course, food. And, besides the species we rely on, there are other needs fulfilled by ecosystems. And these are called ecosystem services. They're naturally occurring, and they range from goods that can be bought and sold to feelings of wonder and enjoyment. If damaged, they are difficult to return back to normal. And they're broken down into 4 main categories. So provisioning services are goods produced or provided by ecosystems. Many of these services are typically traded in markets or used in households. So that would be food, medicine, and fuel. And this is not just biotic factors. This is also abiotic factors as well. Regulating services, benefits from regulating processes include water partitioning, which is the sectioning off of water to be used by different communities, pest regulation, climate regulation, and wastewater treatment. We'll talk about this later down in the year in our pollution unit. Cultural services are non-mineral benefits from ecosystems such as spiritual, recreational, aesthetic, and educational. So these would be any national parks, any, natural wonders of the world, anything like that. And support services are factors necessary for producing ecosystem services. They are necessary for other services to function. So these would be all of our nutrient cycles that we talked about in our last unit, how soil forms, primary production, the water, like everything. This is just the basis of how life on Earth functions and how it is formed due to different Earth systems and processes. This even goes a little bit back to like weather, plate tectonics, because that stuff contributes to how geography is shaped and formed, which also influences climate as well. So both the supply and the resilience of an ecosystem service are affected by changes in biodiversity. The more biodiversity you have, the more stable your ecosystem is, right? So when a species is added or lost at a particular location, the various ecosystem services can be changed. It just depends on how stable your ecosystem is, how biodiverse your ecosystem is, but also the scale of the impact of what's going on, how severe the change is. So typically human-caused issues such as deforestation, the permanent removal of trees, that can result in lower rates of photosynthesis. And now you have this whole chain reaction going on. So because you have lower rates of photosynthesis, you have lower primary productivity, less energy transferred up the food chain. Trees are sanctuaries and habitats for all sorts of animals, as well as a source of food. So you have no food, no shelter for animals. And again, loss of habitat is the number one reason for species extinction. Trees are carbon sinks. If you're doing deforestation, we have a massive removal of our carbon sink, which is more CO2 in the atmosphere. That's increased greenhouse gases, higher temperatures, climate change. So you can see here really well how all the things we've been talking about start to really relate together and how this course is a building course. So moving forward, anything we've talked about so far, including the carbon cycle, greenhouse gases, global warming, they all build and they all relate to one another. So I'd like to see your FRQ responses to be more elaborate and thinking more big and like big picture, especially as we move on to the later units, because that's kind of what is expected of you on the AP test. So when a species is lost from a particular location, even if it does not go extinct globally or introduced to a new location, the various ecosystem services associated with that species are changed. Ecosystem services can now be assigned a monetary value, and that is going to be dependent on, what is the current value of that product or how valuable could it be in the future. And ways of applying monetary value of a service include the replacement value. It's the cost to replace natural ecosystems, the property value, the nearness to natural ecosystems and services, and the time and service fees, which is the amount of time and money people are willing to spend visiting natural areas like natural parks. The estimated yearly worth, not like the total worth, it's the yearly worth, so it can change over time, is 125 trillion, which is 2 times the amount of our current global economy, right? This is also interesting to me because how could you put a price on our planet? To me, it is priceless because it's the only one to have known to harbor life. So this is just also a very interesting concept. So what you guys need to know out of this is you should be able to identify different types of the ecosystem services on a test. We will have more practice on this later this year because, again, this is a building course. So as we learn more about these different things, you should be able to match it to one of the different types of services. Okay, that's all I have for you in this video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know. If not, I will see you next class. Bye.